From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Venezuela's National Constituent Assembly has approved a constituent decree to strip immunity from opposition figure Juan Guaidó, who has played a central role in an attempted coup against President Nicolás Maduro. The body also ordered authorities to continue investigation into Guaidó. He has been under investigation since January, when he violated a travel ban by visiting a group of countries whose leaders recognize him as interim president. President Nicolás Maduro expressed his satisfaction with the approval of the Plan de la Patria 2019-2025 through social media. This happened on Tuesday. The plan entails the program for President Maduro's second term. The president said he was grateful to the National Constituent Assembly for this approval, which has become a constitutional law now. The document was debated across the country and on commissions inside the legislative body. It's a great victory in the midst of the battle, he said, that we are fighting for our nation. We continue to advance. No one will stop us. And the president of the Constituent Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, said the approval of this law complies with the Venezuelan constitution. Now we go to other stories. Venezuela will leave the OAS by April 27th after authorities denounced its interventionist policies and promotion of a coup in Venezuela. Venezuela's ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, accused the head of the organization, Luis Almagro, of seeking to bypass the necessary 24 votes in the General Assembly in order to request an invasion for humanitarian reasons. He said the OAS cannot unilaterally recognize governments or allow other countries like the United States to impose its recognition on other nations. He said that the Monroe Doctrine promotes international chaos and is a clear violation of every country's sovereignty. Moncada said, quote, "Trump will never defeat the ideas of our liberators. We will always be an independent, free and sovereign nation." All schools in Venezuela are open again today following the attack on the country's power grid. President Maduro made the announcement on Twitter while asking students to go back to classes and to continue resisting. He also called on the people to let everyone know that they will triumph over the difficult situation in the country. Meanwhile, throughout Venezuela, contingency plans set up by the government are active to guarantee access to food and water for all citizens. Despite the difficulties, people continue to resist.
Various designated areas to refuel water tankers are available across Caracas. From early in the morning, regular citizens, along with members of the armed forces, organized to distribute water to various communities. The main goal of this plan is to provide water for all citizens.
We are resisting in our own way. President Maduro, the people of La Cementera are with you. Neither the imperialist lackeys, nor Donald Trump, nor that Guaidó will win. We have a president, and his name is Nicolás.
The terrorist attacks against Venezuela's power grid, orchestrated by the international right wing and which sought to leave the country in the dark for a long time, are confronted with the people's resilience.
Right now we need to save electricity. We can't waste any more energy. We know water will come. We know this will be fixed. What we must focus on now is on moving forward. That's all we can do.
Women led the resistance in these communities, along with their children. They stand against violence and demand peace.
Yesterday, some people were burning trees. Why are they attacking nature now? We will continue standing here. We will not allow the violent opposition to enter here.
Teamwork and social equality is made more and more visible as foreign intervention continues to intensify. Citizens condemn being victims of a violent opposition that wants to take power by any means necessary.
Now we go to Colombia, where activist Deiner Seferino Yunda Camayo has been shot dead by police during the social protests on Tuesday, according to the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia. Riot police heavily repressed participants of the protest in the department of Valle del Cauca, also leaving several injured. Witnesses said the activist died right after he was shot in the chest. Tuesday marked the 24th day of protests by indigenous campesino and Afro-descendants who demand that the government fulfill agreements regarding their lands and rights. The dialogue between communities and the government was called off on Tuesday as the protesters say the government has not agreed to certain guarantees. The leaders of the Minga Southwest and the government have now agreed to return to dialogues on Wednesday. Our correspondent Milton Henao was in the Cauca department and has more.
Just behind me is located the school where the Interior Minister Nancy Patricia Gutierrez is waiting to meet with leaders from the Indigenous Regional Committee of Cauca that had been taking part in the protests. Meanwhile, very close from here, the country's Peace Commissioner Miguel Ceballos is talking to the indigenous communities of the area about the murder of one of their members, and also a roadmap for the dialogue between the government and the demonstrators may begin to yield results and put an end to the violent repression of the protests by police forces. Authorities have ordered an investigation to clarify the murder. On their part, the indigenous leaders have said Deiner Seferino Yunda Camayo died after being shot in the chest. Meanwhile, dialogue continues between indigenous leaders and the authorities in the Cauca Valley.
That was Milton Henao from Colombia. And Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has handed in his resignation after weeks of mass protests calling on him to step down. Our correspondent Sergio Rodrigo has the latest.
The Republic of Algeria, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has resigned after he announced a few days ago that he would do so before April 28th. Bouteflika presented his resignation to the President of the Constitutional Council, as it has been reported by the country's state news agency. It has been a difficult day in Algeria. The Chief of Staff had previously called for Article 102 of the Constitution to be applied so that the President could be declared unfit for office. Bouteflika is resigning after weeks of massive protests in which people rejected a fifth term by Bouteflika, but also demanded a new electoral process. In order to do so, a transitional cabinet will be formed. The President of the Senate will lead the transitional task, and it will have 90 days to call for presidential elections in Algeria.
And people are celebrating the president's resignation. Dozens of people carrying the national flag gather in a central square in capital Algiers after the announcement. And even after Bouteflika announced he would resign, Algerians are now calling on the entire government to leave. People continue urging authorities to let them choose their leaders through fair and free elections. Before turning in his resignation, Bouteflika appointed a 27-member cabinet to rule the country until a new president is chosen.
The resignation of the president does not offer anything to the people. We want things to happen on the ground. The people want something tangible. The people want Article 70 of the Constitution, which states that people are the source of all power.
We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. WikiLeaks has said that President Lenin Moreno wants to illegally terminate Julian Assange's asylum to cover up an offshore corruption scandal involving him. He has been living in London's embassy for nearly 7 years. Our correspondent Denise Herrera in Quito has more.
A strong condemnation of Assange from President Lenin Moreno.
Too many times Assange has violated the agreement made with his attorney on his behalf. He can speak, but he cannot lie. He can hack numbers in private accounts, but he cannot breach policies because he is in Ecuadorian territory.
However, Carlos Poveda, Assange's lawyer, has rejected these allegations against his client. The entire defense team of Julian Assange highlighted that they are really worried about Assange's health.
He has aged. For 7 years, he hasn't seen the light of day. He's had limited access to medical care. There are restrictions. He needs to see a medical specialist, but he's had no access. The legal team is also restricted. The last incident with the journalist shows that there are limitations, and it's very difficult to visit him.
President Lenin Moreno also denounced WikiLeaks before the UN for hacking private information and publishing it in digital media. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
Former Brazilian President Michel Temer was arrested again on Tuesday for corruption and money laundering. The former president has several judicial cases against him and had already spent 4 nights in prison after being detained on March 21st. Temer is charged with heading a criminal organization that diverted funds from a nuclear power plant. The prosecutors point to the diversion of nearly $450 million. The former Minister of Mining and Energy, Wellington Moreira Franco, was also detained. Indigenous leaders from the Peruvian city of Fuerabamba, who have been protesting for 53 days against a mining project, have rejected the government's offer of dialogue. Indigenous leader Gregorio Rojo was freed on Friday after being detained for a week on allegations of extorting the Chinese Enterprise Minerals and Metals Group. Rojo said he will not negotiate with the government to put an end to the conflict whilst his legal team is still in jail. Community leaders are demanding payment for the right to use a highway that crosses their land to transport copper from the Bambas. In Peru, indigenous leaders from the Amazon arrived in Lima for the March of Sacrifice, demanding that the government of Martín Vizcarra solves the situation that communities are enduring due to constant oil spills.
Indigenous leaders arrived in Lima after a trip of more than 50 hours. They said that this is the only way to let the state know about the situation indigenous communities are going through in the Peruvian region of Loreto.
We are not here on a trip. We are here to let them know that our forests, rivers, and fish are contaminated due to oil spills. We no longer have food. We exist. We are people. We want to be heard, and we want the authorities to give us solutions.
According to the Amazonian leaders, half a century has passed since international companies and the state started exploiting indigenous lands. However, leaders say the communities haven't received any benefit. They added their people are living in poor conditions and that their natural resources are being affected.
Oil is the heart of Peru, which generates economic resources that don't go to our people. We don't receive any help. There are no improvements to education, health, nutrition, and transport. We are out here without light, roads, water, or sewers.
The indigenous delegation was received in Lima by the president of the ministerial cabinet, who committed to create a commission that monitors the situation of the communities and addresses its demands. However, this isn't the first agreement signed by the state with the communities, and the leaders have already lost faith in these methods.
The indigenous federations from each part of Loreto, from other provinces and districts are coming together. If the government doesn't address our demands, we will start a mobilization and an indefinite strike. This is when the state must pay attention to us, because we live in an oil-rich area, and still we are living in poverty.
The indigenous communities of Loreto are asking the state to declare a state of emergency in all the communities of the Amazon basins affected by oil spillages, and that the resources from the oil revenue must be invested in projects of development for their region.
And dozens of forest fires have destroyed protected areas in Costa Rica. Some 60 million square meters have been scorched since the beginning of 2019. That is the equivalent of more than 5,000 football fields. The Environmental Ministry said that 16 of the affected hectares were protected areas. According to the authorities, there have been a record 108 incidents since 2007 for the first 3 months of the year. The Salvadorian feminist organization Las Melidas is promoting initiatives for entrepreneurship and autonomy for women. Public squares and parks are being transformed into shops to promote their products.
Women from the Department of Cuscatlan in the central region of El Salvador are participating in a fair in the central park of Cuyutepeque. This initiative allows them to sell products they made and to strengthen their economy.
We need to keep opening new spaces so women can trade with their products, where visitors can get to know local products.
The project, called Promoting Rural Women's Economy and Identity, is taking place in 7 departments across the country and has benefited around 1,000 women. The goal is to contribute to new income and a good life for women in the countryside.
In our approach to feminist economics, we highlight 3 main points. One is the autonomy of women, another is co-responsibility in homes, and the other is to care for the environment.
30 women are participating in 11 job initiatives in the Department of Cuscatlan. Food, liquors and handicrafts are just some of the products available. Lilian Arevalo promotes products for personal care, such as soaps and shampoos, made with plants and flowers. She calls them country smells.
I'm actually proud. I'm satisfied that as a woman I can generate my own income that allows me to give my family a better life. It also makes me grow as a person and feel useful to our society.
The Network for Women was founded in 2009. It promotes equality, sustainability and cooperation. It gives tools to women to be independent and also lobbies the Salvadorian state to recognize the work of women, paid or not.
We're taking one last break. Stay with us.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. Israeli security forces have once again stormed Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. According to witnesses, at least 10 Israeli soldiers stormed the complex before assaulting 3 guards and arresting 2 individuals. Since February, Israeli authorities have banned Palestinians from accessing the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which Muslims regard as their 3rd holiest site after Mecca and Medina. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities have demolished a Palestinian-owned residential building in occupied East Jerusalem. According to Israeli officials, the building was built without official permission. In recent years, Israeli authorities have demolished dozens of Palestinian homes on the pretext that they have been built without permission. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is set to be implemented as it gets its final ratification from Gambia. Gambia became the 22nd African country to ratify the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This means the bill now has the minimum number of ratifications needed to come into effect. The trade bloc, spanning 49 countries with a combined GDP of $3 trillion, will facilitate inter-regional trade, and it will also boost growth and help alleviate poverty in Africa. If implemented, this will help Africa move away from reliance on European bureaucratic trade institutions. Wildlife rangers in Kenya have rescued 3 elephants that were stuck in the muddy waters of a lake. It is believed that the elephants got stranded in the mud while searching for drinking water. Climate change has led to reduced amounts of rainfall in many parts of Africa, making it increasingly difficult for animals to access water.
Look at what is happening around. All the rivers that are feeding into the lakes are drying up, and this is a dangerous trend in that at some point we will not have water in any of these lakes. So we really need to protect the catchment areas so that we have continuous water coming into the lakes and retain the lake as it were.
More than 2,000 people who have been isolated since Cyclone Idai struck Mozambique received a major delivery of Red Cross emergency supplies on Tuesday. The Red Cross said they plan to deliver essential items to 20,000 people in the most affected Busit district in Mozambique. The community, which lies to the south of the city of Beira, had been almost entirely cut off from large-scale assistance. This as a result of the flooding and damage caused by the unprecedented storm more than 2 weeks ago. The Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras was in North Macedonia on an official visit where he signed several agreements on that country's name change. This is the first time a Greek leader goes to the neighboring country to seal the agreement.
These 2 selfies will go down in history in the Balkans, a region where conflicts among neighbouring countries have traditionally been more frequent than agreements. The Prime Ministers of Greece and North Macedonia, who reached an agreement on the name of North Macedonia, are taking more steps towards building bilateral relations.
This is a very important day, not only for Greece and North Macedonia, but also for the Balkans. We are trying to build a different narrative for the Balkans.
The 2018 agreement prompted a crisis for both prime ministers, Alexis Tsipras and Zoran Zaev. Tsipras resisted 2 no-confidence votes, while Zaev called for a failed referendum and controversial constitutional reform.
These last months, I earned a very good friend. Alexis is a good friend of our country. I recommend that we all become friends with our neighbor in Greece and with all of our neighbors.
This visit is not just symbolic. Tsipras arrived with 10 ministers and dozens of businessmen. A military cooperation agreement has been signed, a new bilateral organism created, and different trade agreements have been promoted. New border crossings will also be opened.
This is a very important contribution for our people to get closer, for our economic cooperation and trade exchange between the 2 countries.
Even though both leaders say the conflict is over, nationalist parties from both countries oppose the agreement. It may take years before the situation is normalized.
This is a very important matter because it affects the way our people interact. It affects the way one country perceives the other, the way our youth learns their own history and the other country's history.
Both countries are set to hold elections in the upcoming months, which will provide an insight into whether the agreement has been accepted or not.
The United Nations says a quarter of the world's health facilities lack basic water services. The problem impacts 2 billion people. In the poorest countries, about half of facilities have no basic water services, and the World Health Organization says 15% of people who go to a healthcare facility get an infection, and 1 million die due to unclean births.
There are around 1 in 5 births globally taking place in least developed countries. In the JMP report, we show that just half of healthcare facilities in least developed countries have basic water services. So what that means is that if half of the births in least developed countries are taking place in institutions, then around 17 million women in the world's poorest countries are giving birth in healthcare facilities with inadequate wash every year.
The European Union Commission has boasted about the role of the EU funding in increasing what it calls the performance of the Libyan Coast Guard. The European Union has actively sought to relieve itself of responsibility for migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Migrants are often forcibly returned to inhumane detention, which is contrary to international law. In 2019 alone, 311 migrants died whilst making the crossing, over half of the number for the whole of 2018. And Spanish firefighter Miguel Roldan faces 20 years in jail for rescuing drowning migrants in the Mediterranean. Roldan has been accused of aiding human trafficking and illegal immigration by the Italian government for saving thousands of migrants in 2017. The accusation has sparked the hashtag on Twitter, "Saving lives isn't a crime." South Africans are remembering the late anti-apartheid veteran Winnie Mandela, affectionately known as the Mother of the Nation. Winnie died on April 2, 2018. She was a prominent figure in the battle to end the apartheid system alongside her late ex-husband Nelson Mandela. After her husband was jailed in 1962, she continued her activism despite harassments, arrests, restrictions and imprisonment by the apartheid regime.
I think fate determines your...
With that, we come to the end of this news brief, but you can read more on these stories by going to our website, telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us. We're on social media on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.